Hey guys, and welcome to What's New in Zabbix 7.0 webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for joining in. I can see we have a lot of folks from all over the globe saying hi in the chat. That's very much welcome. Thank you for letting us know where you guys are from, and it's really cool to see you here joining in to hear about the latest Zabbix features introduced in Zabbix 7.0. My name is Artur Slontons. I'm a technical marketing engineer at Zabbix, and today we will go through many, not all, but many of the features introduced in Zabbix 7.0, something that we consider having the most impact and that you will find the most valuable. Please use chat for networking. I can see new messages coming in. Yeah, say hi, share your location if you want to. That's always interesting for us to see. Comment on the features. Feel free to network. That's what the chat is for. As for any questions that you may have regarding the features covered here, we have the Q&A section, and you can use that to ask your questions. Today with me, I have my colleague Kasper Smednis, who will be helping me answer the questions in the Q&A section as they come in. So simply to make things easier for us, please use Q&A section for any questions about the features or the product or anything else, and we will try to do our best to answer them. So I can see we already have one question, so that's correct. Q&A section is for those. I'll try to take a look and maybe cover some of the questions as I go through the presentation. So let's start. So first off, before we cover any individual features, I'd like to talk about what Zabbix 7.0 focuses on. And the focus with 7.0 is enterprise-grade features that will help you enable new use cases right out of the box. So enterprise users have various different requirements, from security to ways they monitor things to scalability, performance, and so on. And we've tried introducing features that allow you to do a lot more right out of the box. Many of these things that I'll be covering in this presentation you were already able to implement them previously by customizing Zabbix. It's an open source product. You're, of course, free to change the code, edit things, and so on, integrate it with different solutions. But the focus here is on usability and giving the users the ability to do things right out of the box without any complex extra customizations. So now let's get to the features. So speaking of new use cases, first off, we have introduced our new synthetic end user web monitoring. So what is synthetic web monitoring? Essentially, what this feature allows you to do is simulate an interaction by a real user with a real browser with your web app or website and collect the results of such an interaction. And this way we can test various aspects of the website or web application, from availability to different performance metrics, transaction statuses. We can even take the screenshot of the website and display it on our dashboards, right? If you have a dynamic website that you want to see how it looks like whenever, let's say, an issue appears, you can now do that. And we've had web monitoring features previously, but they were quite limited. No support of JavaScript, for example. So we introduced this more robust way to monitor websites and web applications. And now I'll try and delve deeper into it. So Zabbix uses a Selenium server or a plain WebDriver to perform this synthetic web monitoring. And on top of that, the Selenium server utilizes a headless browser to perform tests. The most popular browser vendors are supported: Chrome, Chromium, Firefox. Anything else that you've probably heard of that is considered popular will be supported out there. And this is essentially a consideration on the Selenium side of things. What it supports, not necessarily on the Zabbix side of things. The Selenium server is not provided as a part of Zabbix packages, so you won't get this if you simply install Zabbix packages. You have to install it separately. And the most simple way we found out so far to get started is deploy it from Docker containers. I can see, can you please confirm in the chat that you can hear me, by the way, because I'm seeing someone saying that they cannot hear me. Okay, someone's saying audio is okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Just clearing things up. So yes, most simple way to get started, Docker containers. Real easy to spin up, connect to Zabbix, and get going. And to connect it to Zabbix, you will need to specify the WebDriver URL, the URL of your container in this case. And we have a new process called browser pollers that are responsible for performing these synthetic tests. We've also introduced a new item type to support this, a browser item. And in this item, the magic happens in the JavaScript over here. So you will have some JavaScript when you create this item right out of the box for simple checks. And you can get started there, simple website checks. But we are also providing a template. Over here, I have a screenshot from our Git page, or if you're deploying Zabbix 7.0 from scratch, you will have it out of the box. We have the website by browser template over here, and you can use it to collect sort of a general set of website and web application metrics. So what this template does, it contains items for website navigation and resource statistics. It also collects the current website screenshot, and we'll talk about how that's done in a moment. It contains triggers for slow load times and website availability, and it also has a template level dashboard for displaying these collected items on a dashboard and also displaying the screenshots alongside the graphs. To collect screenshots, we've introduced a new type of information, a binary type of information, and this type of information is used to collect and store images. Browser item can collect screenshots of your website, for example, in base64 format. It's then stored in the database, and it can be then displayed via a binary dependent item. And of course, you have to be careful with this because screenshots do take up space. So you have to be careful with your data collection intervals and so on. That's a question that I've received a lot, but yeah, they're stored in the database, right? Yes, they do take up some space, so something to consider. And the dashboard that the template contains right out of the box looks something like this. So we have various performance metrics on the right side and then the screenshot on the left side. The item history widget has been updated to support displaying screenshots. So that is what is used to display them on your dashboard. Here you can see an example of it. And of course, this template, you're free to extend it on your own, change the dashboard, add new items, add new triggers, modify the JavaScript itself for synthetic monitoring to your liking. You can use the baseline script that we provide as an example, and from then on, you can move onwards with it. Let me check the Q&A section real quick. Okay, looks like my colleague is covering. There are some upgrade questions. Can I upgrade from 6.0 to 7.0 without reinstalling agents on each server? Yes, agents are backwards compatible, but you will miss on some of the features like proxy, load balancing for active agents. Okay, next up, we will move on to performance. So we've made some major strides in improving performance and scalability, especially for enterprise level use cases, like I mentioned. And one of the things that we've done is we've introduced asynchronous data polling and actually a bunch of other things. So let's get started with that. As you know, data in Zabbix is collected by various data collectors. We have pollers, trappers, pingers, many other processes responsible for data collection. Right now, we will focus on pollers over here. So pollers are processes that are responsible or were responsible before 7.0 for collecting various metrics, from agent metrics to SNMP metrics, for example. And they were synchronous, meaning they could collect only a single metric at a time. Right? As a result, you required tens or hundreds of pollers in your environment, up to 1,000. That was max. And the fact that we can collect one metric at a time limits us because we request a metric, we have to wait for a response before we can move on. So to alleviate this, first off, we've split the poller process into three different poller types. We have a SNMP poller, Zabbix agent poller, and HTTP check poller now. So that enables you to scale your environment in a more simple fashion, depending on what type of metrics you are collecting, right? And here we can see a visualization from just one poller process. We now have poller and also SNMP poller, agent, and HTTP agent poller. The regular poller process still remains. It's responsible, for example, for port checks and things like that, things under simple check, but it doesn't do SNMP polling, agent polling, and HTTP polling anymore. So we have three new processes just for that. And each of these new processes is now an asynchronous process that can collect up to 1,000 values in a single go. And these processes are thread-based now. And we will have a nice visualization in a moment of what this means. In the configuration side of Zabbix server, we now have the max concurrent checks per poller parameter, which essentially tells you how many concurrent checks, parallel checks, you can collect in a single go. In most cases, this will stay as 1000. We are just keeping the options open to changing it if you want to for testing purposes or something like that. We have a question, proxy also. Yes, this also affects proxies, of course. And the way this works, we will have a nice visualization over here. So we have the old synchronous data collection on our left side, right? So we request a metric, receive a metric. Then we request metric number 2, receive metric number 2, and so on. So you can see how this can be slow. Well, with synchronous data collection, we are requesting however many metrics, up to 1000, that we have to request. We don't have to wait for a response before we proceed. So we requested metric 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then metric 1, 4, and 3 comes back. And we continue with the next metric as per our update intervals and the requirements of collecting data. So we don't have to wait for metrics to come back. So combine this asynchronous polling with new poller processes, and you have a lot more scalability on your hands and a lot better performance than compared with what we had before. And here we have an example. We have 20 pollers with 40% utilization in Zabbix 6.0. And when we move to 7.0 for our agent checks, we have a single poller process that's around 10% busy due to asynchronous polling. So that essentially is a major performance improvement and can be, depending on your environment and the metrics that you are collecting, your bottlenecks and so on, you could see tenfold or even more performance improvement. So this can be very great. Next up, another long-awaited feature, proxy high availability and load balancing that we've introduced in Zabbix 7.0. So this is done by way of proxy groups. So we've introduced a concept of proxy groups. Proxy groups support load balancing and high availability logic. So instead of hosts being assigned directly to proxies, they can now be assigned to be monitored by a proxy group. And here we can see we are creating a new proxy group that contains various proxies over here. So proxy groups contain multiple proxies, and we can define failover periods, minimum numbers of proxies within a proxy group for it to be considered up, can provide description for it, and then assign hosts to proxy groups. In proxy groups, we have various parameters, like I mentioned. For example, the failover period is used to essentially decide if proxy in a proxy group is unavailable for X amount of seconds or minutes. Only then it's considered offline. We can also define a minimal number of online proxies. Let's say at least 2 proxies need to be assigned and healthy to a proxy group for the group to be considered online. Proxies of older versions will be excluded from host rebalancing because the load balancing logic is contained only from 7.0 and upwards. And of course, if a proxy group has less than the minimum number of proxies online within it, as per your configuration, hosts will not be monitored by this proxy group because the whole group will be considered down. So we can assign proxies when we create or configure a proxy. We can assign it to a proxy group. There are no limitations to the numbers of proxies that you can assign to a proxy group. And it's just essentially a new field that you have to select optionally if you wish to use proxy groups. How does rebalancing work? So hosts are rebalanced only if a couple of conditions are met. First off, the number of hosts assigned to a proxy needs to differ from the average 2 times or more. So we calculate the average number of hosts assigned to a proxy in a proxy group. And if it differs by twice or more, only then reassignment happens. Also, another thing on top of that, the difference between the number of hosts shouldn't be less than 10. So there is some math going on over here. And yes, load balancing is done based on the number of hosts, right? So we balance based on the number of hosts across proxies in a proxy group. Hosts exceeding this average number are unassigned from proxies and then reassigned to proxies with fewer hosts. So this logic is implemented as to not have hosts being constantly rebalanced across your proxies, right? We don't want hosts being thrown around every second across proxies in a group. Only when this logic is in place, only then hosts are reassigned. And here we have an example. So we have 5 proxies with a number of hosts on them. The average number of hosts per proxy is 30. And based on the logic that I provided in the previous slide, we can see we have 2 unbalanced proxies. So what happens? Hosts get unassigned and then reassigned across proxies in a proxy group. So over here we have a fully balanced, very neatly balanced group of proxies over here. When a new proxy is added to a proxy group, the group is automatically rebalanced. New average is calculated, excess hosts are unassigned, and then reassigned between proxies. Regarding agents, agents need to be configured to accept connections from proxies in a proxy group. For active agents, the server active parameter needs to contain the IP address of at least one, but preferably multiple proxy nodes from the group, because what happens is the active agent connects to a proxy from a proxy group, and then it gets told which proxy it should talk to, which proxy it should be assigned to. If we have only a single address in the server active, could be that that proxy is down, and then the agent will not receive essentially a message that it should connect to another proxy. So have 2, 3 proxies from a proxy group in your server active parameter. For passive agents, the server parameter should include IP addresses of all proxy nodes from a proxy group. So this is where you probably either have some automation in place to generate the server parameter, or maybe you'll have a config file that you copy across your hosts or something like that. Next up, before we move on to proxies, I see a question in the chat. Do we need to upgrade to 6 point something before upgrading to 7? No, we don't. You can upgrade directly to 7 and you'll be good to go. That's how Zabbix upgrades have always worked. You can upgrade directly to the latest version, follow the database upgrade in Zabbix logs, and it will be performed over time depending on how large your database is and from which version you are upgrading. I can see a couple of questions in the Q&A section. Are templates upgraded as a part of upgrade process? No, we don't do that because we don't want to override your templates, because most of our community members do introduce their own changes to our templates for it to fit their environments, and that's perfectly acceptable and what we expect. So if you wish to upgrade your templates, you need to go to git.zabbix.com, download our latest templates, then import them. You'll see a diff, and then you can decide, do you wish to import it, do you wish to back up your old templates and then import, or whatever else you want to do. About upgrades, I've already answered that, so you can upgrade directly to 7.0. So questions about MySQL optimization. Your regular MySQL guides should do the trick, but as we usually say, use the database backend as per usual that you are most familiar with and you're comfortable with tuning yourself, or you can use Zabbix services for us to help you tune them, but essentially it's a case-by-case basis. About SNMP traps, currently SNMP traps are not supported by proxy groups. That's something that we plan on figuring out down the line, but yes, SNMP traps are not supported by proxy groups. Okay, let's move on to the next feature, proxy memory buffer. So more improvements to proxies, enabling new use cases. So we've introduced a couple of buffer modes for proxies in 7.0. We've introduced 3 modes, disk, memory, and hybrid. Previously, you had only disk mode, and this is configurable in the proxy configuration, and we'll talk about these modes in a moment. So disk mode, something that you are already familiar with. Each value collected by Zabbix Proxy is stored in a proxy database, either MySQL, Postgres, or SQLite. And this can cause bottlenecks because you need to have a database and you need to have storage where the data gets written on. And that storage, especially on embedded hardware, can be quite slow, right? So that is an unnecessary performance bottleneck. That's disk mode. Memory mode, which we've introduced in 7.0, does not require storing data in the database. The database itself is still required because it stores configuration of what proxy should be monitoring, but the collected metrics are not stored in the database. They are stored in memory. So that can enhance your performance by quite a bit. Once again, 10 to 100-fold performance improvement, depending on how slow your disks were and how fast your memory is. But that enables many new use cases for embedded hardware, especially for edge computing, for example, where that is the only option oftentimes, because you don't have to flush the data to the database. It's stored directly in memory. And then we have the hybrid mode, which is the best of both worlds. In hybrid mode, we have our memory buffer, but if it gets full, then the old data is flushed to the database. So only if the memory buffer is full, the data gets flushed in the database and then sent to Zabbix server. So you don't lose data if your memory buffer is full in hybrid mode. In memory mode, if your memory buffer is full, the oldest data gets discarded. In hybrid mode, that is not the case. So this is the best of both worlds and probably what most of you will be running. Because you still want to have that backup, that database backup. It's still there. It stores config. And if push comes to shove, okay, we can flush our oldest metrics from memory to the database because we don't want to lose our collected metrics if the buffer is full. And that's it for proxies. So a couple of new use cases, HA load balancing, buffer modes, like I said, very nice for embedded hardware and edge computing. Now let's move on to one of the major UX improvements, centralized control of data collection timeouts. So if you work with Zabbix, you probably know we do have a timeout parameter in our server config. And if you, for example, had a metric, let's say a custom script that took a long time to be executed, you've probably increased this timeout to 10, 20, maybe 30 seconds. And the thing with timeout is, first off, every time you change it in the server config, you have to restart the Zabbix server to apply the changes. And on top of that, the timeout in this scenario before 7.0, it would affect all of metric collection. Right? So, okay, you have that one metric that you know is slow to get collected, but you also have other metrics. And if, for example, a metric simply cannot be collected due to an error, Zabbix would still potentially wait for 30 seconds for it to be collected, which is not what you want to do. That makes your polar processes be super busy while they wait for that response. So we've decided to alleviate these issues by introducing timeouts on various levels. So we now have a timeout for Zabbix server. We can do a per proxy timeout, and we can specify a timeout for an individual item. And on top of this, this is all done in the front end. No restarts are required. So we have a new section in Administration General where you can define timeouts per item types. Once again, you do this in the front end. No need to restart the server to apply these settings anymore. Then per proxy, we can override timeouts because it makes sense. We have a proxy in a different data center, different networks, different timeout rules apply here. So you may want to override the timeout that you've defined globally with your own custom settings. And here we override the SNMP agent timeout, external check timeout, and script timeout to be different from our global timeout. On top of that, if you have that one individual item that takes a long while to be collected, you can now once again override the timeout settings on the item level. And here, for example, we've overridden our timeout settings to allow this for this item to be collected in 45 seconds instead of the default, which was 4 seconds. So when you can do that on an individual item, once again, no need to restart the server anymore. Also, all of this is done in the front end. So I think this is a great performance. This is a great usability improvement. It's a lot more simple to configure this. It doesn't require a server restart. And once again, it enables new use cases with metrics that can take a while to be collected. The timeout in the config file still remains and is used as a communication timeout between Zabbix server and Zabbix proxy. And this, I think, is perfectly fine because you will configure it once, you will find the number that works for you, and you will probably leave it as is without having to reconfigure it every couple of days or every couple of weeks when new metrics come out as it was before, when new metrics are monitored as it was before. Next up, another major performance improvement. So due to the fact we've introduced asynchronicity, we were able to greatly improve network discovery speed and performance. Previously, it was could be extremely slow on large network segments. Each network segment was processed by a single discover process, and it was done sequentially. So oftentimes, if a community member or a customer told us, hey, network discovery is taking a really long while to discover hosts and services, our suggestion was to split this into smaller discovery rules. So we decided to work around this. And here's an example of how this used to work. So we're scanning IP addresses sequentially, discovering services on them, right? And if a service is slow to respond, everything gets halted. The whole discovery process gets halted over here. And we can see services that are unavailable halt the whole thing. So over here, we're seeing SSH service halting the whole discovery process. And this is just an example. Your timeouts could be longer, for example, for network discovery, and it could take you hours and hours to discover everything. So in this case, we had a 3-second timeout. So we've introduced a discovery manager and discovery worker process, which was previously known as the discover process, that can perform asynchronous network discovery. So what this means is that we now support concurrency or parallelization, whichever word you want to use. And in your network discovery configuration, you'll see the maximum concurrent check setting. By default, it'll be unlimited. But if your network team objects to aggressive network scanning, then you can set a custom parameter here for maximum concurrency. And over here, we can see it highlighted. And visually, it works like magic. We discover all of our set of IP addresses as soon as possible instead of sequentially. We discover everything in parallel, and then we discover services in parallel. And a service being unavailable doesn't halt the whole process. And just to prove a point, I was doing a network scan of our office network segment, and previously it took me hours at a time. I don't really know how long it took me because I didn't wait for it to finish. Then I implemented this new network discovery in 7.0, and it took me around 10-20 seconds to scan the whole network segment and discover hosts in it. That's around 250 IP addresses, right? And it was discovered, yeah, I created the network discovery rule, went to grab a cup of coffee, came back, literally grabbed the cup, came back, refreshed the discovery section, and everything was discovered. So when we say 10 to 100-fold increase in network discovery performance, yes, depending on how Zabbix was configured previously, you'll see that. You'll see a whole new set of use cases and a new way to configure network discovery rules that is a lot more simple than it was before. Next up, a request that we've seen appear from time to time, being able to send metrics over HTTP. And to enable this, we have introduced a new API method, history push. And history push API method can be used to send metrics to Zabbix Trapper items or HTTP agent items with the setting enable trapping configured as on. The sender's IP address can be verified against the allow hosts configuration parameter, where you can specify which IP addresses can I receive metrics from. And since this is a new API method, you can configure permissions for it in your user roles. Here is an example of a history push request being made, pushing various metrics, numeric metrics, log entries, and so on. And like I said, they're being pushed to Zabbix Trapper items. So very simple, but extremely valuable, especially if you're migrating from one solution to another, or you have maybe a second monitoring tool that you wish to collect data from and push them to Zabbix to visualize everything in a single pane of glass view in Zabbix. And we'll talk about visualization in a moment. A single pane of glass scenario works better than ever in Zabbix right now. So this is a great way to migrate or integrate Zabbix with another solution. Next up, a small feature, but once again, I think it enables a variety of new use cases. You could use Zabbix to do some configuration management before 7.0, but the thing is, the scripts that you configured for example, manual host actions over here, they were static, meaning you couldn't provide custom input. You had a script, you could click on a host and execute the script. That was it. Now we've introduced a manual input macro that can be replaced with custom input. So here we can see this manual input macro, and over here in input configuration, we can select either a list of inputs in dropdown that I've configured. So here I have a comma separated list of services that I may want to restart, or you can allow a custom string to be entered that will be verified against a regular expression. And the way this looks like is when I click on a host, for example, under monitoring hosts, I can then select what this macro will be replaced with based on my drop-down settings. So I provided 3 services, and now I can select which service do I wish to restart based on the drop-down options that I provided over here that you can see on the screen right now. Once again, a lot more flexibility when it comes to configuration management or doing some basic host maintenance or host tasks with Zabbix. Next up, the really fun part, new ways to visualize your data. So we've done great things with visualization. We've introduced various new widgets, such as honeycomb, gauge, pie chart, host and item navigators, stop triggers, and so on. And this enables various new use cases. Here you can see some examples of dashboards that you can configure. The widgets pretty much are self-explanatory. For example, pie charts can be used to display how much disk space is taken, right, out of the total. They're still based on items and item patterns. Gauge can be used with thresholds to essentially highlight when something is overutilized. Honeycombs, once again, they support transitions between colors. So you can, over here, when everything is okay, I can see a green cell, and slowly as my utilization of CPU or memory in this example grows, the cell changes color to orange, yellow, and then finally red, well, yellow, orange, and finally red. And I can quickly see at a glance which host and which item is problematic over here. You can also see the thresholds being highlighted. So very much customizable. And I won't talk about Navigator widgets right now because there is another new use case with our dashboards that you'll see in a moment where the Navigator widgets come into play. And this use case is making your dashboards dynamic. This is also possible in 7.0. So we've introduced and implemented a new communication framework to enable communication between widgets. And what this means is a widget, a Zabbix widget, can behave as a data source for other widgets that use this widget as a data source. That means we can dynamically click on a host or an item in a Zabbix widget, and other widgets will display information based on what we've clicked. And images speak louder than words. And here I have a GIF where I'm using my honeycomb widget as a data source. And you can see I'm clicking on different items in the honeycomb, and gauges automatically display data depending on what I've clicked. And this also applies to developing custom widgets. So if you're developing custom widgets, you can also develop them in a way that they serve as a data source or use other widgets as data sources. And many widgets support this logic. For example, you can use maps, click on a host in a map, and then your metrics will be display. Your widgets will display metrics for the host that you've clicked on the map. And I have another GIF image where we're using Navigator widgets. This is their whole purpose. So we have host and item Navigator widgets. I can click on an item or a host from the Navigator widget and apply whatever I've clicked on, whatever host or item I've clicked on to my other widgets. So here I'm using a combination of item navigator and top hosts. I'm selecting item from the item navigator and the host from the top hosts, and my gauge, single item widget, and graph gets dynamically updated. So this will simplify things a lot for your NOC team. They can now click around your Zabbix dashboards and just see what's going on. They get a better overall view of your infrastructure health. Next up, a quick one, but very much requested, multi-factor authentication. So previously you could implement MFA, but that required some custom tinkering around. Now we support multi-factor authentication out of the box. We support time-based one-time passwords, and we support Duo universal prompt authentication. And it's quite simple to configure. Under administration authentication, you can enable it. The configuration is really nothing out of this world. It's what you would expect when configuring MFA, nothing too crazy. And now I'll go through a quick list of other significant features and improvements maybe that I don't think deserve their own section, but are still very useful in some particular use cases. So first off, we've moved our licensing model to AGPL version 3. This should not and does not affect the way Zabbix is used. The only thing that this covers, so GPL version 3 that we've chosen from GPL version 2 covers more and better legal language when it comes to different regions of the world. So more scenarios are covered by this license. And the FRO part covers cloud deployments of Zabbix, so providing Zabbix as a service. This means that even if you provide Zabbix in such a scenario, you still have to expose the source code of your Zabbix deployment, and that's it. For pretty much anyone else, and even in this case, in cloud cases, it still remains as you would expect. It's still a free product. There are no paid versions, still fully open source. We've also introduced an optional Zabbix server and frontend update check in the system information widget or section. So this means that whenever a new version of Zabbix comes out, you will see a notification in these widgets that new server or frontend version is available. This is fully optional. Yes, this does mean that Zabbix does phone home to check for updates, but this can be enabled and disabled. So if you don't feel comfortable with Zabbix phoning back home, you can disable this. So this is fully in your control. This is not a mandatory thing that we've introduced. We've introduced new DNS items, DNS performance item that checks the DNS performance of the endpoint, and DNS get item that gets various DNS statistics in JSON and can be used as a master item. We've added user macro support in item prototype and item names. We further improved just-in-time user provisioning. We've enabled the ability to configure media for users provisioned by JIT provisioning. We've redesigned how performance checks are done under the hood. So now for users of type user and admin, front-end performance will be a lot faster than it was before, because previously there were some design flaws in how permissions were checked for users and admins. Those design flaws have been fixed, so you should see a lot better front-end performance. We've introduced HTTP connector tool for native Kafka topics. So that's for metric and event streaming. So now you can stream metrics and events to native Kafka topics. We've improved behaviors when the same host group was discovered by multiple LLDs. So this pertains to when you're creating a host by low-level discovery rule from a host prototype, and then you are trying to assign that host to a group, to a host group created by another low-level discovery rule previously, you would get an error message. Now this has been fixed and fully supported. So hosts created by low-level discovery rules can be assigned to host groups created by different low-level discovery rules. And we've also improved how host maintenance status recalculation is done. Previously, if you set a host in maintenance, it could take you up to a minute for the maintenance status to be applied. Now it's instantaneous. Next up, remote commands can also be executed by Zabbix agents using active checks. This was not possible before. Various aggregation improvements, new ways to aggregate data, and how aggregations behave when an item in the aggregate group is not supported. So many scenarios with not supported items that would lead to errors have now been fixed. We've added the ability to assign tags during host auto-registration. Previously, this was not possible. Many of you resorted to using APIs to apply tags after the host has been auto-registered, resort to using Zabbix API. Now this can be done in the auto-registration configuration. PDF reporting has been improved. Previously, only the first page of a dashboard was saved in the PDF report. Now multi-page dashboards are saved in PDF reports, so all of the pages of the dashboard. We've added a new set of pre-processing rules for error handling and validation pre-processing. So now you can match error messages and display a more human-readable description of what went wrong by using regular expressions. We have also added the ability to test your configuration files from the command line. Previously, when you changed something, for example, when I edit config files, I use VI if I make a typo, right? And then restart Zabbix server, agent, or proxy, it won't start up because I made a typo in the config file. Now you can actually use command line to test your config file, verify that it's valid, and only then restart your server, proxy, agent, whatever else to apply this configuration, thus avoiding unnecessary crashing. JSON path and XML path can now be used in trigger functions. Previously, it could be used only in items. And we further added flexibility to our audit logging, and you are able now to turn off LLD, auto-registration, and discovery logging, which could take up a lot of space. You now have the option to turn it off. And many more changes. Here I focused on only the changes that enable various new use cases. Next up, new templates and integrations. We constantly continue churning out new templates and integrations, and here you can see a list of some of those, some cloud-oriented templates for Google Cloud Platform, Azure, AWS, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. We've added integrations for HPE, Cisco SD-WAN, Checkpoint, improved Microsoft SQL Server templates, and much else. Some of these have been backported to previous Zabbix versions, and this isn't a full list of templates for 7.0, of course. We constantly continue working and developing new templates, so you'll see more and more coming. And if there's something that you wish to be introduced, use our feature requests to request that. In our bug tracking portal, there is a type of project called feature request. So you can request a particular template if you want to. And if we see enough noise, both from our community members and customers, we will get on it, prioritize it, and develop it if we see that there is a need for that particular template. So this is just a preview of what's new, with a lot more to come throughout the life cycle of 7.0 and many things also being backported to 6.0 within reason, of course. And that's pretty much it. Now let's get to the Q&A section. Feel free to visit the What's New in Zabbix 7.0 page to see a full list of features, and also release notes to see even a more detailed list of bug fixes and new features introduced. This meeting will be recorded. We'll also have another webinar tomorrow morning, and one of those recordings will then be uploaded on YouTube and shared. How to create a custom view of the problem widget. I want to change order and I guess the ID of the column. I'm not sure. So problems are ordered, if I'm not mistaken, based on the time they're generated. Out of the box, you cannot really change how they're ordered. So you would require further customizing the widget, maybe adding new filtering options and so on. And you can always create a feature request asking us to improve and enhance the problem widget. Any manuals that explain how to do this. So depending on at what point of the presentation you ask this, we will have a couple of workshops. You can see them in our webinars section for proxy load balancing, and I think also web monitoring. So feel free to attend those to learn a thing or two. And also we have our trainings, official Zabbix trainings, covering all of the new features and a bunch of existing features, of course, everything, covering everything Zabbix. And of course, there'll be blog posts and video recordings and much, much more to come, both on Zabbix blog, YouTube channel, different conferences that we'll be hosting. Zabbix Summit, for example, will cover various use cases as time goes on, and we see how customers use Zabbix 7.0 and so on. And our documentation section, of course, covers how things should be implemented and how they are configured. How can we discover VMs running on physical servers without installing Zabbix agent on each VM? Depends on what kind of hypervisor you're using and so on. Zabbix supports VMware monitoring out of the box, but usually your hypervisor will have an API that Zabbix maybe can communicate with and then use low-level discovery to create hosts from host prototypes. Then let's see, what else do we have? Any huge changes on the API? No huge changes, no bug fixes, new API method, but no huge changes. We've released a official Python library. That's a huge change for API that you can use. Previously, we had only the community library. Now we have our own that you can read more about with examples on our blog. So I'd say that's a big change introduced before 7.0. Not a change, but a whole new feature, a new library for our community. As far as I know, export to CSV hasn't been tinkered too much with, so that's still in a to-do section of our features. So agents, regarding load balancing and agents starting from 7.0 will fully support load balancing. Yes, older agents simply don't have the ability to be redirected to the proper proxy. They'll just stick to the proxy that they connect to, and that's it. And they don't know how to react to rebalancing essentially messages. So 7.0 and onwards fully supports load balancing. On our website, some of our courses and certificate exams are still labeled at 6.0. Some are changed to 7.0. Can we expect all of them to move to 7.0 sometime soon? Yes, of course, everything will be moved to 7.0. Yes, should be moved very soon. Agent updates, any central control? Not yet. We know that the feature request is there. We're looking at it. In most scenarios, community members use orchestration tools to centrally manage, update, configure agents, and so on. But out of the box, nothing yet. Are there any possible pitfalls when upgrading from 6.0 to 7.0? So check the database requirements. If you're running an older database, you may have to upgrade it, of course, in our documentation section. There are new tables being created, so that's another thing that's happening under the hood. And of course, as per always, the complexity and the time the upgrade takes very much depends on what customizations you've done in your database and Zabbix tables and the size of your database. Nothing new regarding Windows event log monitoring yet. Maybe more to come. We need to figure out how 7.0 does, and then we will plan for 7.2, 7.4, and 8.0. You can take a look at the current roadmap. That will, of course, be adjusted as per your requirements and your feedback, and we can expect more new things in many new directions. The recorded session will be shared on our YouTube channel. As far as I know, no changes for search filters. What about bigger UI changes? There have been some minor UI changes. Some things have been improved. For example, more model windows are now supported for the most sections, actually. Currently, we haven't introduced anything super major, but once again, we're waiting for your feedback, and there's always room for improvement. And if we see that UX and UI could be further improved, we will work on it. One major UX feature, like I said, is timeouts, right? So that's a major improvement. It's really hard to estimate how long the upgrade will take from 6.0 to 7.0 because it very much depends on your database performance, your database size, and if you've done any modifications to Zabbix tables. Any changes to auto registration, the ability to assign tags is one major change. Are there any minor revisions planned? Yes, of course, we constantly introduce minor revisions if we discover ways to improve performance, fix bugs, and so on. Yes, we churn them out at quite a rapid pace because bugs should be fixed ASAP, and other improvements like minor performance improvements, things like that should be fixed as soon as possible. So yes, of course, you can expect 7.0.1, 2, 3, 4, and so on throughout the life cycle of 7.0. Upgrade process happens automatically. You upgrade the packages, you restart the Zabbix server, and in the log files, you'll see how all of the new changes are applied on your database. So there's no need to execute any scripts manually. Any chance this will include availability for report exporting in some different formats, CSV, XLS, PDF, and so on. Currently, what we have is PDF reports, right, based on dashboards. The rest use cases are covered mostly by our API. That's our community members and customers do more complex reporting. Once again, feature requests are very much welcome if you wish to see a particular feature or ability to export your dashboards or reports in different formats, then let us know and we'll see what can be done over time. When upgrading from 5 to 7, do we upgrade the proxies first or the server first to minimize compatibility loss? So you would upgrade, ideally you'd do it all at the same time, have your proxies and server upgraded, but usually you'll go with the server and then upgrade the proxies. Is Postgres plus timescale DB the recommended setup? We recommend using what you're familiar with, That said, Postgres with timescale does offer some benefits, out-of-the-box partitioning and compression being the major ones. So if you feel comfortable with Postgres and timescale DB, there are great benefits to using that. We do have official Ansible playbooks for Zabbix. Feel free to just Google that. We also do have some articles on our blog and presentations in our conferences. So feel free to check those out. Regarding the sizing, it's very hard to estimate sizing at a glance. It very much depends on what kind of metrics you're collecting, how often you're collecting them, for how long do you plan on store them. So it's not really a question that can be answered right off the bat. We need to sit down. Well, you would need to sit down with our support engineers, get in touch with our sales team, ask for an estimate, and then we can take a look at what you're collecting, how you're collecting, and how much that will take. Let me see what else do we have. Um, let's see, we have more questions coming in. I have not checked feature requests yet, but our timeline graphs diagrams in the backlog. So there are various new visualization approaches in the backlog. I'm not really sure what you mean by timeline graphs diagrams. But if I recall correctly, if I understand what you're thinking of correctly, something like that is on the table, but I cannot really officially confirm or deny anything yet. We're still looking at 7.0 feedback. The recording will be shared on our official YouTube channel. Okay, let's see. We got more coming in. Bigger UI changes. Once again, nothing on the table. We'll see how that goes. We're trying to improve UI step by step with modal windows and a bunch of other things, but currently I cannot really disclose anything major. We're still looking at 7.0, and we'll see where 7.2 and 7.4 goes. Let's see what else. If using a VMware template, will a discovered host be merged into pre-existing host? VMware template creates hosts from host prototype, so you'll see a bunch of new hosts for your VMs. Will Windows Server be supported by the new official Ansible collection? As far as I know, no major changes there, so most likely not. I'm not sure. I haven't checked it myself, truth be told. You'd have to check the Ansible collection documentation to see what it covers. I can create dashboard that the dashboard, let's see, can I create a dashboard? I guess that loops in an automatic loop as a slideshow. I would assume that is the question. Yes, that can be done and could be done for a while now. Is there any plan to configure proxy connection frequency to the server? There are configuration parameters in proxies that essentially define how often proxy sends data and retrieves configuration. So that can be configured on the proxy itself already. History pushes like Zabbix Sender, only Zabbix Trapper and HTTP agent with Trapper enabled is available for it, right? That is correct. It works with the same types of items as Zabbix Sender. Okay. With Zabbix, can I export a PDF of all hosts inside of a host group and all items? That would require API, most likely. With PDF reporting, you can create reports based on your dashboards. So maybe host navigators with item navigators could be used for that or something like that. That's one way, but probably what you're looking for is a more robust reporting by way of Zabbix API. Are there any plans to support mobile devices? Very good question. Cannot confirm or deny anything currently. There are third-party tools third-party mobile graphical user interfaces for Zabbix, but nothing official yet. Can I implement a remediation workflow with Zabbix? Yes, Zabbix does support automatic remediation workflows. For example, restart a service or an application or attempt to restart it. And if that fails, only then alert the responsible person. Does the command line testing verification work if the Zabbix server is running in a Docker container? I'm not sure what would be the use case for that, because the way you would change the config file for a Zabbix Docker instance is you would, run a container with different parameters, and if something fails, it would then crash or not start up. So I'm not really clear on the Docker question. If I monitor vCenter, will it catch all VMware hosts? That once again depends on the permissions of the credentials that you provide Zabbix, what it discovers or does not discover. But yes, it could discover everything if you have the correct permissions assigned. All right, I can see that the influx of questions is seemingly over. We've answered all the major ones. We have another one about Kubernetes. Yes, Zabbix does have official Kubernetes templates out of the box. I've had them for a while, so you can use those to monitor Kubernetes. And we also have a bunch of blog articles and videos for that. So feel free to use that Kubernetes template. Okay, let's question about authentication. So currently what you saw out of the box is what we have: duo and time-based one-time passwords. Potentially more to come down the line, depending on, once again, your feedback, your requests. This is something that we continue improving on, similar to what we did with Vault. We now support not just HashiCorp, but also CyberArk. So potentially the same will happen with MFA. So thank you a lot, guys, for this session. I'm glad to hear your feedback over here. Like I said, a lot of attendees from all over the globe. Feel free to deploy 7.0 in your test environment or production environment, upgrade to it to get all of the new features. The visualization features are really nice. The UX improvements, performance improvements are really great that I covered over here. So feel free to check all of that out. Your feedback is very much welcome by us. We can't wait to hear from you about the new use cases that you discover with Zabbix 7.0. And don't forget workshops. Visit our webinar section to check out the upcoming workshops about web monitoring and proxy load balancing. And hopefully I will see you soon, guys. Thank you a lot and have a great day, evening, morning, depending on where you